Today's presentation is on adjustment disorders and life cycle transitions. As you read in your chapter, this chapter is different from most of the others that focus specifically on Axis 1 disorders in the DSM-4. This is more about how people live through different stages of life, especially adulthood. A lot of psychologists and psychiatrists do not like the way that issues that people bring to therapy are put into a medical model of saying, this is your disorder and this is what's wrong with you. DSM is used by most therapists that I know in some ways to get reimbursement from insurance, because insurance then recognizes certain disorders and will reimburse therapists for those specified disorders. But if it's a developmental issue, not so much. So it's strange because so many politically minded psychologists find the DSM to be pathologizing of human beings, when what they'd rather see is taking a human at their, as they go through life and learn and change and grow. And the question becomes, like, are we always learning and growing? As I put that, shouldn't all problems that people bring into therapy and their symptoms of psychological pain and distress and conflict be thought of as like part of the process of living and changing and growing? So I think there's a lot of merit to that school of thought. If you look at the treatment literature, about half of the people who go to therapy don't even meet criteria for a mental disorder. This chapter talks about 3 different adult life cycle transitions. The first one is the transition to adulthood, adult life, trying to figure out who you are as an identity, what your career choices might be, and who you might have the first kind of long-term romantic relationship with, and then also friendships. Family transitions, once a person, if they decide to have a family, and maybe even marriage and children. So that's the second middle version of the developmental stages that are addressed in this chapter, and then transition to later life. The chapter is also called adjustment disorders because that is a category that can be diagnosed, and basically it's kind of lighter basically than the PTSD, because there's not necessarily trauma, but I'm not going to read all the different criteria here for an adjustment disorder. But you can see there's marked distress and some impairment in social or occupational functioning. So they're having trouble. Person is going through some of these transitions. They're having a hard time making sense of things, trying to understand it and what their role is in this point in life. You can see that sometimes these adjustment disorders are diagnosed with these specifiers, with either depression or anxiety or a combination. Sometimes people act out, and so you see disturbance of conduct. But this is a category in the DSM that allows for acknowledgement of sometimes there's just problems in adjusting to the demands of life. Along those lines, one developmental model that has been popular since the early 1900s actually is Erik Erikson's stages of life. And your book really emphasizes these last 4 stages, that in adolescence into the 20s, a person is really trying to figure out who they are. They call it identity versus role confusion. That's a time in life where a person is trying to understand who they fit with, what their values are, what their interests are. And then young adulthood prepares someone for, basically once you know who you are in this stage, it sets you up for being able to have an intimate, close relationship with another person, because you are familiar and accepting of yourself. And then you can know yourself and have some continuity of self and can really be with another person, and they can see you as stable. And there is stable identity and something to really ground a person. So that allows for formation of intimate relationships versus isolation, where people withdraw and don't connect really with others. Later in middle adulthood, they talk about generativity versus stagnation. And generativity is really about feeling like you're contributing in some meaningful way. A lot of people feel like that they, by raising kids that are healthy and happy and well adjusted, they have participated in generativity. They've generated something positive that gives to the next generation, and they can die happy because they've contributed something well. Like for myself, I don't have kids. I'm happy with my life without kids, but I do get some generativity from my teaching career. You know, I feel like I really connect with the students that I work with, and that it's fun to feel like I'm contributing in some way to future generations. And then later adulthood, where a person is faced with, did I make good decisions in my life? Is it something I can look back on and feel proud of, and think about and reflect fondly on those things? Or is it like, wow, I messed up? And then a person's faced with more bitterness and despair. So this is Erikson stages. We're going to talk about a lot of different stages, stage models, especially in this. I found this picture of Lincoln students. I thought that was good. Transition to adulthood is the first stage that we're going to talk about. And there are lots of models to discuss. One researcher argued that during this stage, it should be considered like a moratorium. And the actual definition of moratorium is a temporary prohibition of activity. Some say that like the 4 years of college kind of allows for that, a time to explore. And I put it here as a time when experimentation without commitment allows for exploration that involves relationships, career, and interests. So a person can like discover, is this a good major for me? Is this a good, like even like university activity for me? Do I like to be in a leadership role? Would I rather be more of in a helping role? Do I like being out in nature and is like hiking and that kind of my interest, where I want to spend a lot of my time biking, exercise, or do I'd rather be more of an indoor person? I mean, you're really kind of figure out who you are. As allow time for mistakes and figure out who a person is. There's a famous psychologist who was in Sigmund Freud's camp for a long time. She split with him because she did not like the idea that he came up with of penis envy. She thought it was sexist and horrible, which it was. And she said that men actually have womb envy. And it looks like her name is Karen Horney. It's actually pronounced Horney. It's German. And she described this point in life, this transition to adulthood, that it involves a lot of conflicts, and especially in relation to others. And she said there are three ways in which a person can move, but this generates some conflicts. And it's referred to in your book, even in terms of a young adult dealing with their relationship with parents. That part of the young adult's role is to want to move towards parents and feel a closeness and the attachment that was really rewarding, hopefully earlier in life. But also there's a moving away and wanting to be independent and not having constrictions and rules and feel like that I can make my own decisions. But there's also moving against it, not against in a bad way, not against in a way that's hurting others, but in a way that is establishing I have my own efficacy, my own power, and I can make something meaningful of my life, really. So moving against others, trying to establish your own sense of authority in your own life. I think it's an interesting way to conceptualize this point in life about how conflicts might come up, because some of those different things, I mean, moving towards and moving away from, obviously that can create a conflict. And sometimes parents, and dealing with young adults in this stage, trying to figure out what is my role here? Is this is my son or daughter wanting to be close to me? Are they wanting? And so a lot of times that can raise actual arguments and conflicts within a family unit. Marcia, also, actually that's the last name. So this guy came up with different identity statuses, which I thought was interesting ways described in your book. As a person moves into young adulthood, I'm gonna start with foreclosure because I think it's the most simple one. And that is basically committing to the scripts and roles that are handed to a person. So if your parents expect you to be a school teacher and you become a school teacher and you don't question that, it's like, that's what I'm supposed to do. That's what mom and dad want me to be. That's called identity foreclosing. So you foreclose on a house, you lose it. It's done. And so basically you're saying, here, you decide for me. There's also diffusion, which is not necessarily foreclosed, not just taking from like parents or the society, but it's still a time of experimentation. But a person is still really connecting with this group and then with that group and then with that group. And so it's more of a temporary way of identifying oneself. And it's more of an exploration time. There's also a moratorium where a person, they are actively trying to figure out who they are, but not committed yet. It's interesting. I accidentally kind of accidentally, in my therapy practice, ended up working with several young adults, and I've seen some of this going on with clients I'm working with, actively seeking out, how do I want to define myself? Like, obviously, as in my ethical approach to therapy, feels like you get to explore and discover that for yourself. And a moratorium is about actively seeking. And then there's this achievement. Under the status, it says individuals explore their different alternatives and they come to a conclusion about who they are and who they should be. And they like, I'm happy with who I am. Some have argued that the one piece of continuity, the one sense that's constant, should be our sense of values, what we value most, and that we can change our careers, we can change our interests, we can change even how extroverted or introverted we want to be. But if we keep to our morals and our values, that is the one stable thing that hopefully will be definitive for part of our identity. I like that approach because it is a commitment to the things you value most, which could be love, it could be loyalty, it could be, you get to decide. The problem is, like, a person may have achieved their identity, so they've reached that identity achievement, but societal factors can complicate that. And your book actually talks about alienated identity achievement, which says, I know who I am, but I'm not okay with like the limitations and the scripts that society is handing to me. This young woman is my niece, and so I have a brother who's 4 years older than me, and Maddie here is about to turn 30. She was, I mean, incredibly intelligent, actually graduated high school, and your book talks about the research on those who have a high school education or less, and some of the alienated kind of identity achievement that they have. They may know who they are, they may have explored who they are, and my niece has done this too. I mean, she decided to move out of her parents' house when she was 17 and finished high school, living in an apartment with friends. And then my brother assumed she was going to go on to college, and she's like, why would I want to go to college when I don't know what I want to major in, and student loans are expensive, and I would spend that much money on school when I don't know what I'm doing? And my brother said, that makes some sense. I get it. And I understood too. It's like, yeah, why would you do that? She ended up moving to Oregon and working on a weed farm, and waiting tables. And now after 10 years of post high school, she's kind of ready to actually explore possibilities of doing university work. But I mean, actually, I really feel sorry for the current generation of students that are in school with the incredible student loans, how expensive college is. Even then, once you graduate from college, trying to buy a home, how expensive that is, and how low paying so many jobs are. That can lead to an alienated identity achievement. So a person who's stable in their sense of self, but feels like there are a lot of limitations imposed by society. Going to switch from that first stage of transition into adulthood to what's called family transitions. And this is like the middle years of life. And this could include getting married. Your book talks about a stat that says like 90% of all adults will be married at some point in their life and having kids, and then eventually kids grow up and then they leave the house. It's called empty nest. Sometimes divorce happens, sometimes not. This is a stage model here that is described actually in your book. I just copied and pasted this from the internet that talks about the different points: the beginning of families, the first stage of marriage, and starting family, then having children. And a lot of people assume this is what I'm supposed to do, and this will make me happy. The research discussed in your book, and as I have here, indicates, and this is just from research, marital satisfaction is the high point at married without children in at least 4 different studies that are charted out here. Once you have children, marital satisfaction goes down and continues to go down. And when I look at these data, I am happy I don't have kids. And I mean, with my twin sister and my brother having kids, and they often look at me and like, wow, I wish I had your life. But I know they also love and enjoy their kids. But now they're all pretty much grown, and kids are expensive. So be careful about your decisions there. And what I saw with my brother and my sister, and what the research bears out, when your kids are teenagers, the satisfaction is the lowest. And basically, there's that time when it's like the moving against, they're trying to establish independence, but there's basically arguing and trying to figure out where the boundaries are. And so it can create a lot of conflict in a home. And so you see that when the empty nest happens, that marital satisfaction starts to go up. And so that's just from at least 4 different studies, and also according to research discussed in your book, that's what happens with marital satisfaction over time. I already mentioned that. One thing your book does in this stage of life development of the family transitions is that it emphasizes if you're gonna have a happy home, there's got to be good communication. I know I talked about this when it came to the chapter on sexual dysfunctions, and how critical communication is for a happy relationship. It's true in general, just in everyday life. I mean, to be able to look at your partner and realize, okay, when I see them doing something, I'm going to make the best attribution or explanation for why they're doing something. And what the research shows is that if you reciprocate good with good, and you're given affection and you respond with affection and positive compliments and just support and interest and investment, when that's reciprocated, and you see, obviously every partner has their down points, their negative points, their things that bother you. If you can overlook that to the best you can, that combination, really reciprocating the positive and trying to overlook the negative, works out for the best relationships. It takes work to do that. It takes a lot of attention to your own internal and kind of talking, and about how you're explaining your partner's behavior to yourself, and challenging it if you're going all negative and trying to use your partner for a scapegoat for your own unhappiness. I've seen that happen in couples. I've done some couples therapy work with clients, and when couples get into that position where they're blaming each other. Actually, I mean, I have down here the 4 no-nos that are talked about in communication in a relationship. John Gottman and his wife have studied couples for decades. And basically, they've had people come into their lab and say, you're a couple, we're going to have you sit down, we're going to have you argue for 10 minutes. And the big things that couples argue about are sex, money, and how to raise kids. Those are the three biggies. They said, pick one, go for it. We're going to record you, video it. John Gottman and his wife had gotten so good at reviewing these recordings, they identified when they see one of these 4 things happen in the communication between a couple, it's like they say it's a red flag. They call it the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. That if you see this criticism where one of the partners is always saying, you always do this, you always do that, that's bad. That's not a good thing. The worst one is contempt, where there's mocking, that kind of crap. I mean, when you are basically treating the other person like they're not an adult, valid human being, that's the worst red flag. Defensiveness, not taking anything in, not really listening. And then one of the worst too is stonewalling, and men do this more than women. That if there's a discussion or argument happening, there'll be a shutdown. Sometimes there'll be a physically leaving the room, leaving the space, but other times it will be like nothing. And that doesn't work out either. It's interesting. Gottman and his wife have put couples when they're filming these interactions and arguments they're recording, they have physiological monitors. So they'll measure like the heart rate, the pulse rate through a wrist monitor. They'll measure skin temperature, blood pressure. They find when men are stonewalling in an argument, their heart rate is skyrocketing, their blood pressure is skyrocketing. They're physiologically overwhelmed and typically don't know what to do. But it's not a good communication style. And so what they do in their couples therapy approach is try to like be able to identify when that's happening, bring the heart rate down, calm down, and try to put words to what's going on in a person's head. Your book talks about the divorce gene. Look at that. I'm not going to talk about it. It's a whole section in your book. Take a look at it. But they also talk about some prevention and treatment of relationship problems. When they talk about the prevention, they talk about like premarital counseling. I thought I was going to say something else. They had, which is usually really pretty good training about trying to understand what two people's expectations are when they go into a relationship. And having that put out. One program is talked about the PrEP program, the Premarital Relationship Enhancement Program, where you bring participants into a group. And so you may have several couples who are about to commit to a relationship, and you have them talk openly about difficult topics, about those three things I was just talking about. What are your expectations about sex and money and raising kids? Those are the big ones. Also, household tasks, the chores, who's going to do what? And money is just more than just, okay, how do we do our money? Like, do we have a joint account or not? Well, that's a big one too. But like, how are we going to spend it? Is it going to be on trips? Is it going to be investing in home, furniture, and cars? Is it going to be, what do you want to do? That stuff should be put out on the table. The research shows that in comparison to control groups, couples who go through this are happier and they have better communication. There was one subset of participants, and typically I believe that was women, who had, after taking this PrEP class, had super high expectations, like things are going to be great now, but you can't have your expectations that high, because then they became the most disappointed group of participants in that research program. Once a couple, so that's trying to prevent relationship problems. Once a couple's in a relationship, if they have problems, couples therapy can be incredibly valuable. Trying to be able to hear and talk back and forth. Even some of the work that I've done with couples, there's a lot of, okay, we're going to do I statements. Your chapter even talks about this. You're going to own your feelings. It's not going to be you always do that. It's like, when this happens, I feel blank. When this happens, I feel blank. And then the other person has to say back, you just told me that when this happens, you feel blank. I mean, that's got to be a true hearing and being able to reflect back what you just heard. And that goes back and forth and back and forth. The ideal in this cognitive behavioral couples therapy is like to have that hearing, have that listening, but also trying to bring expectations to be more realistic and to accept imperfections in your own partner. And that you don't have an agenda where you're trying to change the other person, because that never works. It is about acceptance. What the research shows that half the people who do this kind of treatment, if they're having problems, they don't improve. But others who get this treatment are able to use the tools and they improve significantly. So it doesn't work for everybody, but couples therapy can be a real valuable relationship saver for many people. I don't have a lot more to say about this last stage, which is interesting because I feel like I'm between the family transition stage and this transition to later life. I'm considering retirement myself. I mean, just the things that go along with older adult life. A lot of times that involves health concerns, because as a person gets older, their body starts to break down. Along with that, your primary five senses start to diminish. Your sense of smell and taste aren't as keen. Vision definitely goes. I didn't have to wear these a few years ago. Hearing, forget it. Also, memory issues. Now, one of the things about memory as you get older is that what they call the crystallized knowledge, all the facts, the contents, all song lyrics you've ever been exposed to, all that stuff's still up there. So you have that, but the fluid intelligence isn't as available. Young people have a lot of fluid intelligence. That means young people can jump into a new situation. You can be given a new iPhone and it's like, okay, I got this. And you can figure out all the new apps and get it going. Older person would be like, how do I dial the number? And learning a new program on a computer or a phone, whatever, that's harder for an older person to do. Sorry, back to health concerns. There are real health risks. In addition to the census kind of going down, you've got diabetes, cancer, heart disease, #1 killer of the US people. Osteoporosis, that's weakening of the bones. Arthritis, I've had my first bout of that. Never expected that to happen. Yeah, those are real things to consider. So another area here is sex. Women go through menopause, so they're no longer, and that's usually in the early 50s, they're not able to bear children. And oftentimes men have erectile dysfunction. I think I talked about that in the sexual dysfunction chapter, that there are a lot of medications that can be useful for that, not without their potential side effects though. But if you look at the research that's discussed in your book, even with these things going, and when a woman goes through menopause, that does not mean she's not interested in sex. There may be difficulty with lubrication and things like that, but those things can be handled. Those things can be discussed and worked with. And the research shows 1/4 of the people in the 75 to 85-year-old category still had sex once a week. Usually when I mention that to classes, students that are traditional college age go, ew. And students often realize, well, hopefully at some point in your life, you're gonna make it to that age. And I'm guessing if you're enjoying sex now, you're gonna wanna enjoy it then too. So there's a lot of ageism that happens. Your book talks about that. It's just discrimination against old people and devaluing people because they're old. Our society really does that. I mean, they really overvalue or like really promote youthful appearance, youthful look, youthful vitality, and really denigrate anything that's older. One of their health concerns that's not an issue that people assume is sleep. If you just look at the research, that's not, I mean, there's some stereotypes about that, but it's doesn't hold up under the research data. An area that your textbook looks at are, and you've heard about reminiscing, just reflecting back onto the past. And your book talks about research in this, about different styles. There's integrative, and that is like when you're getting to an older age and you can look back and you accept your past mistakes and losses, but you're making a coherent story that has meaning and value to you. The instrumental is more of a self-centered approach, I think, where you're reviewing all the goal-directed behaviors you engaged in and you see your impact and influence and you're really trying to like capitalize on that. So, you know, I mean, it sounds like bragging to me. If you have an older person reminiscing in an instrumental way, they're just telling you about all the crap they did. Transitive reminiscence is telling stories, often with a moral, includes cultural pieces, trying to pass on to future generations. So if you have grandparents that are always telling you stories about those times and about what they learned from that, that's more of a transitive reminiscence. Escapist is like, oh, the good old days and today sucks, but there used to be better back in my day. Not a good necessarily form of reminiscence. The obsessive is the worst, obviously, and the research bears that out. They have the worst overall adjustment problems and psychological health and life satisfaction. That is just a focus on failures and bitterness and despair. And then there's a narrative style, which just sticks to the fact. The top two, the integrative and instrumental, typically have the best psychological health outcomes. Actually, if you look at life satisfaction, over the lifespan, it remains typically fairly stable, even through the older years, which is a good thing to see for those who make it up to the older ages. I believe that's my last slide. Yes, it was. Please look at the research in your book on suicide in the older stages of life. That's all I have for you now. This is our last chapter. I hope you learned something from this, and I will have the final coming up soon.